toxic masculinity.
That's right. I am toxic. She is masculine. Together we are Toxic Masculinity, the least professional show on YouTube. Hit it.
China brainwashing Christians to renounce their faith. Renounce?
Renounce. It means to
Renounce.
say that, it's to say that you're not really a Christian, or to say you don't believe in Christianity or something like that, despite the fact that you really do, because of their evil political agenda. Now, I didn't have time to read this one. I read most of the stories, but I didn't get a chance to read this one. So I'm going to be learning about this along with you guys. So let's have a read here. China brainwashing Christians to renounce faith, report finds. This is in the New York Post. Very reliable news source, the New York Post, despite what you might have heard on Twitter. This little joke about Hunter Biden's laptop. Anyway, China is attempting to brainwash Christians by holding them in mobile transformation facilities, according to a new report. Radio Free Asia relayed stories last week from a man given the pseudonym Li Yuize, I don't know how to pronounce it, who said he was beaten in a windowless room for nearly 10 months. Holy crap. That's not good. Lee said he was detained after authorities raided his house church in 2018. That's what they have to do in China, actually, because religion is illegal. You're not allowed to be a Christian. So they have these like house churches, like our apartment, for instance. We would invite other Christians, and then we would read passages from the Bible, talk about our faith, whatever it is. A minister might preach or something like that in small groups, which is actually probably a little bit more like what Christianity was like back in the old days, back in the years more near when Christ was around. So but anyway, that's what they have to do to hide their Christianity. God, I hope you guys can't hear that cat, because it does sound like he's being tortured, but he isn't. He's just locked in the... Did you put the... You did it? Okay, man, he's pretty loud. Let's see here. He says, there were no windows, no ventilation, no time allowed outside, said Lee. I was given just 2 meals a day, which were brought to the room by a designated person. He said authorities threatened, insulted, and intimidate you. Sorry. He said that authorities threatened, insult, and intimidate you. These were the United Front officials. Men, women, sometimes unidentified, usually in plain clothes. The police turn a blind eye to this. You have to accept the statement they prepare for you. Lee added that if you refuse, you will be seen as having a bad attitude, and they will keep you in detention and keep on beating you. Let's see here. Oh, this is Catholic worshippers attending a morning mass on Easter Sunday at a Catholic church in a village near Beijing. Okay, so I guess they do have some churches. I thought it was completely illegal in China, but apparently not. So maybe they have. I was telling you that they have these things, Potemkin villages, these places where they show the rest of the world. This is what Russia really looks like in the USSR, but it was like fake.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the term Potemkin village is an interesting history. It's based on the time of, I think, Catherine the Great, and she was like traveling down a river, and they put up like these facades of nice buildings to make it look like the towns were nicer than they actually were. And there's dispute about the historical accuracy of it and specifically what was done. But the idea was that was the original concept of the Potemkin village. And then they would take down these facades, and then they would run down the river, and they would put them up again in a new town to make it look like all the towns were really nice. It's kind of a weird thing. Anyway, look up Potemkin village. Fascinating history. So this church stuff that they might have, the churches that were allowed to photograph from the West, they might be show churches that the Chinese government is allowing a few of them so that the West thinks they have religious freedom when they actually don't. His fellow inmates, he said, were released on bail and had taken part in church-related activities. The suppression affected both Protestants and Catholics, with priests disappearing for 5, 6, even 10 years at a stretch. Man, 10 years? That's not good. Last week's report was just the latest to shed light on alleged abuses at the hands of the Chinese authorities. The BBC report on the Uyghurs included alleged former detainees who claimed horrific abuses like raping women with electrocuting instruments. Jeez. Yeah, the Chinese are pretty messed up. Like, the truth is, I don't know. Okay, here's the worshipers waiting outside the Zishiku Cathedral to attend Christmas Eve Mass in Beijing, December 24th, 2019. So I guess there must be some degree of religious freedom, or at least the appearance of it. I don't know how much religious freedom that the Chinese have. I should actually study up on that a little bit more, because from everything I've heard, they have no religious freedom, and yet there's photos of churches and stuff like that. So maybe they've loosened up some of the restrictions on religious freedom so that they don't seem like they're such horrific monsters to the rest of the world. But according to this guy, they're still horrific monsters. Anyway.
Well, I'm sure they are.
Yeah. You didn't grow up with any kind of religious restrictions because the USSR was already over.
Well, no, I didn't. I mean, Russians are pretty religious.
Yeah, throughout Russia, they've actually adopted a more religious. It's almost become a trend, right, for people to be more religious now in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But you often talk about how the Russian Orthodox Church is very corrupt. Like all the ministers, all
It's
the priests are very rich.
A way to it's a business. Church works with government, and
Right.
it's kind of keep people. Our preachers teach people to obey
The government.
and something, not obey the government, but just if you're suffering, just accept it and stuff like this.
Right.
Like you in
You mean to tolerate the suffering they endure at the
yeah.
hand of the Russian government?
Yeah, and like a difference between when I first went to American church and Russian, like Russians all like gold images, like icons.
Yeah. Everything's gilded. Everything's
And
ornate.
there is no place to sit. I remember me as a child when my grandparents' parents were taking us to a church, like before Christmas or stuff like this, and you just stand for the whole preaching. It was like maybe a few hours. You would just stand and suffer. I remember me as a child, I was basically like sleeping, sitting on the floor with the candle.
Right.
And from then I was like, I hate churches, because it was such a negative experience because you're basically suffering there. The smell of the stuff they are burning is terrible. No place to sit. It's basically suffering.
Yeah.
It's not how church should work. And your churches, American churches, you can sit, awesome music, entertaining, fun, no this crazy gold and we have
very
in
simple.
Russia.
Very minimalist. We tend to go.
It's
my family, we tend to go
difference.
to non-denominational Protestant churches, which, I mean, most of you will probably recognize that. I've tended to find, like when I was in college, I would meet people who were very strong atheists. They hated religion, they hated Christianity, and every one of them that I spoke to, who had been religious growing up, were Catholic. And I'm sure some Catholics are watching this and they're like, "That's not me." And I definitely knew Catholics as well, who loved Catholicism, loved the church, loved God. They were very strong, faithful people. But I think that something like that has happened to some people in the Catholic Church in America as well. The people that I spoke to who were atheist, who had been Catholic, kind of had the same experience where it wasn't maybe quite as brutal as that, but they felt like the Catholic Church felt to them a bit abusive or something like that. They had a very bad experience in the church, and this sort of drove them away from the faith, which I think is the exact opposite of what people that are involved with the church are supposed to do. So I always viewed, because my family, we were Catholic when I was very young, but we transitioned to being Protestant about the time I was born. So although I did go to Catholic church a bit, mostly we went to Protestant church, and I grew up Protestant. And it seems to be, in my view, a much more palatable version of Christianity for most people. But I always admired Catholicism because I like tradition, and I like the level of respect that's shown to God in the Catholic Church. Whereas I wouldn't say the Protestant traditions or the stuff that we do at Protestant church is less respectful necessarily, but it appears to be less respectful, in my view. And I grew up Protestant, so nothing against being Protestant, but like the kind of music that would be played in church, like a lot of you might recognize what I'm saying here. I've been to too many Protestant churches where the minister seems to be less of a respectful man of God, and more of like an aspiring stand-up comedian. Like you have these certain ministers will try to perform for the congregation and try to make everybody laugh and be funny and cool, and there's not much substance to the message. And I have always really hated those kinds of sermons. And then there's another kind of church that I've been to where it's like maybe the pastor might be pretty good, but you have these these like church musicians that come out, and it almost seems like this is like the best opportunity for them to be like a rock star.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and they're like just like thrilled by this moment that they get to perform. And I don't like these performances. I feel like it's a little bit too self-indulgent with some of the people who are at some of these churches. And I've been to a lot of churches. So that's not to say the majority of churches are like that. I think, just because you're a performer at a church, or you're a funny pastor, or you're a great musician or something like that, that doesn't necessarily mean you're like this. That's not what I'm trying to say. Like, I went to one church in Portland, and the musician of the church, he ended up becoming a pretty successful, like, Christian rock band type thing, and they would actually tour and stuff like that. And but I remember hearing him preach occasionally, and I thought, this guy's better than the minister. The minister was actually one of those sort of stand-up comedy type guys. But this musician, who was like a legitimate sort of rock star, he was actually very good at preaching. And he seemed much more of a faith-based type guy, and I much more appreciated him. But anyway, that was kind of a random tangent. We went a little bit off course there, but just musing about American churches. But yeah, I think it's important to talk about this stuff from time to time.
Yeah.
But we do have quite a few stories, so maybe we should move on. Sorry for that, folks. But anyway, leave comments.
I feel an obligation that we have to do a longer show today.
Yeah, because we missed yesterday's
show.
Yeah. But yeah, if you have any comments about American churches, please leave them in the comment section. We'll try to get to them. You don't necessarily have to leave a super chat. Just write @Toxic Masculinity. But if you do that, wait for the end of the show when we're actually looking at the comments. All right, shall we move on to the next story?
Just want to remind you, darling, they might disappear because the chat is...
Well, that's why I'm saying wait until the end of the show when we're actually looking at the chat.
Ah, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
How dare you question me? How dare you? All right, okay. And my best Greta Thunberg impression.
Next story.
Yeah, next story.
255 transgender inmates request transfer to women's prisons.
Yeah. Okay, this is the other story. This is the other story I didn't have time to read. So let's have a look at this.
They should make prison for transgenders separate.
Yeah, just a prison just for transgenders. Yeah, I don't mind that. Let's hear 255 transgender inmates request transfer to women's prison after California passes new law. Toxic Masculinity. Weekdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific.